The air in a courtroom is a special kind of cold. It doesn't just chill your skin, it seeps into your bones, carrying the weight of broken promises and shattered futures. For Olivia Reed, 8 months pregnant and utterly alone. That cold was a physical thing. A block of ice pressing against her chest. Across the aisle, her husband, Nathaniel, a man who once promised her the world, sat with his arm draped casually around the shoulder of his mistress. And the mistress, Sophia, was laughing. It wasn't a nervous titter. It was a bright, cruel sound that echoed in the cavernous room, a sound that said, "I've won." But the heavy oak doors of the courtroom were about to swing open, and a woman in a steel-grey suit would walk in, changing the sound of that laughter into a choked gasp of disbelief. The end of Olivia and Nathaniel Reed's marriage didn't come with a bang, but with the quiet, insistent buzz of a second phone. It was a sleek black burner phone, hidden deep within a box of old tax records in the back of Nathaniel's home office closet. Olivia had been looking for a document for their mortgage refinance, a mundane task for a life she believed was beautifully, perfectly mundane. They had it all, or so the world saw. The sprawling, modern home in the Seattle suburbs with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington. Nathaniel's booming success with his logistics software company, Viridian Dynamics, and the most precious project of all, the baby boy, growing steadily beneath her heart. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece. Dinners with influential people, charity galas where their donations were announced to polite applause, and weekends spent sailing on the Puget Sound. Nathaniel was charming, ambitious, and devastatingly handsome. He was the man who could command a boardroom with a soft-spoken word, and who until recently had looked at Olivia as if she were the sole source of light in his world. He would trace the swell of her belly at night, whispering names for their son, plans for his future, promises of a love that would last an eternity. The buzzing of that phone was a discordant note in their symphony. Curiosity, a prickling, unwelcome sensation, compelled her to answer. A woman's voice, husky and impatient, was on the other end. "Nate, darling, are you still stuck in that meeting? I've got the champagne on ice at the Fairmont. Don't keep me waiting too long." The line went dead. Olivia stood frozen, the cold plastic of the phone slick in her palm. Nate. No one called him Nate, except for a select few from his college days, and the Fairmont was where he claimed to have a week-long conference. He was attending a conference she now knew was a lie. The name on the text chain that filled the screen was Sophia. The messages were a brutal graphic archive of a 2-year affair. Pictures of them in hotel rooms on tropical beaches she'd never been to, screenshots of bank transfers, and promises of a future that had no room for a wife and child. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal of the flesh, but the betrayal of their life. He complained to Sophia about Olivia's mood swings during the pregnancy. He mocked the way she'd fallen asleep on the couch after a long day. He called their unborn child the complication. When she confronted him holding the phone like a weapon, the charming facade didn't just crack, it disintegrated. His face, usually so open and warm, became a mask of cold fury. There was no apology, no remorse. "You went through my things." He'd spat, his voice low and dangerous. "After everything I've given you, given me." Olivia's voice trembled, a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "You've given me a life built on lies, Nathaniel. Who is she? Who is Sophia?" "Sophia Vance is a woman who understands me," he said, snatching the phone from her hand. "She understands what it takes to be with a man like me. She's not Sentimental. The way he said the word sentimental was like a curse, turning all the love and care she'd poured into their home, their life, their coming child, into a weakness. The next day, a courier delivered a thick manila envelope. Inside were divorce papers. Nathaniel wasn't just leaving her, he was trying to erase her. His petition claimed she was emotionally unstable, a spendthrift, and that their prenuptial agreement, a document his team of lawyers had drafted, and she'd signed in a haze of love and trust, left her with virtually nothing. He contested the ownership of their home, claiming it was purchased with premarital assets. He offered a paltry, insulting amount of child support, contingent on her signing an NDA. He was trying to leave his pregnant wife destitute and silent. Her first attempt at legal counsel was a disaster. A harried, overworked lawyer named Mr. Peterson flipped through her papers, his face grim. "Mr. Reed has Thornton, Davies and Finch representing him," he'd said, sighing. "They're sharks. The prenup is ironclad. He's hidden most of his new assets in a series of LLCs. Honestly, Mrs. Reed, your best bet is to take the settlement. Fighting this will drain you, and you'll likely end up with less." Despair was a physical weight pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She was 8 months pregnant, facing financial ruin, and the man she loved was a monster. She would sit in the half-finished nursery, rocking in the chair they'd picked out together, and weep until she had no tears left. The world had shrunk to the 4 walls of that room, a pastel blue prison of her own broken dreams. She was lost, and Nathaniel, along with his laughing mistress, was about to walk all over her. The days leading up to the preliminary hearing were a blur of sleepless nights and anxiety-filled days. Olivia felt like a ghost in her own home. The scent of Nathaniel's cologne lingered in the closet, a cruel reminder of the man she thought she knew. Every object from the coffee maker he'd gifted her to the paintings on the wall they'd chosen in a gallery in Paris was tainted. He had already moved out his belongings professionally packed and removed with chilling efficiency, leaving gaping holes on shelves and walls that mirrored the void in her life. Her lawyer, Mr. Peterson, called with updates that only deepened her dread. "They've filed a motion to have you vacate the house, Olivia," he said, his voice tired. "They're claiming it's a primary asset of Viridian Dynamics, listed as an executive residence. It's a stretch, but with their legal firepower, they might get it." "But our son," Olivia whispered, one hand protectively on her stomach. "This is his home. I can't be homeless." "We'll fight it," Mr. Peterson said, though he sounded anything but confident. "Just be prepared for a tough day in court." Olivia's support system was small. Her parents had passed away years ago, and her closest friend, Jessica, lived across the country in New York. They spoke every night, Jessica's fiery indignation, a small comfort in the suffocating silence. "This is insane, Liv," Jessica fumed over the phone. "He can't do this. There has to be someone who can fight these people. Peterson sounds like he's already surrendered." "No one wants the case," Olivia admitted, her voice hoarse. "Nathaniel's firm has a reputation. They bury people in paperwork and legal fees. Everyone I've called says the prenup is too strong and the fight isn't worth it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Jessica's voice changed, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Okay, this is a total long shot. I mean, it's basically a Hail Mary. But I heard a name from a colleague of mine at the Law Journal." "Who?" Olivia asked, desperate for any sliver of hope. "Her name is Eleanor Vance. They call her the Surgeon. She's a legend in complex litigation and forensic accounting. She doesn't just argue a case. She dissects it, finds the one tiny flaw, and rips the whole thing open. She once took down a pharmaceutical giant, because she found a single falsified signature on a 30-year-old patent document. Olivia felt a flicker of something, but it was quickly extinguished. She sounds expensive and impossible to get. She is, Jessica confirmed. She barely takes on new clients. Rumor is she only takes cases that personally interest her, cases where there's a deep, fundamental injustice. People say she's more of a crusader than a lawyer, but a crusader with the fangs of a viper, hon. But Liv, what do you have to lose? The name stuck with her. Eleanor Vance. It sounded powerful, solid. That night, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline, Olivia stayed up until 3 a.m. She couldn't afford a retainer. She couldn't even get a meeting, but she could write. She opened her laptop and began to type an email to the general address on Eleanor Vance's minimalist firm website. She didn't write like a client seeking legal services. She wrote like a woman whose world had been stolen. She poured out every detail, the second phone, the cruel texts, Nathaniel's cold dismissal, the meticulously planned financial evisceration. She wrote about the nursery, about the kicks of her unborn son, about the terror of facing single motherhood with nothing. She attached the divorce petition, the prenup, and a single photo of her and Nathaniel from a year ago, both of them beaming his hand, resting on her still flat stomach. The subject line was simple: he called our son the complication. She pressed send and felt a profound emptiness. It was a message in a bottle tossed into a vast, indifferent ocean. She didn't expect a reply. For 3 days there was nothing. Mr. Peterson called to confirm the time for the hearing. 9 a.m. sharp, courtroom 4B. Try to look composed, Olivia. Don't let them see they're getting to you. Composed. The word was a joke. She felt like a fragile piece of glass, already spider-webbed with 1,000 cracks about to be struck by a hammer. The night before the hearing, she packed a small bag for the hospital, just in case the stress induced early labor. She laid out her only decent maternity dress, a simple navy blue one that felt woefully inadequate for a battle against titans. At 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzed with a new email. The sender was E. Vance. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The message was brutally short, devoid of any pleasantries. I've reviewed the documents. The prenup is a work of art. My office. Tomorrow. 7 a.m. Do not be late. Bring everything you have. Olivia read it 5 times. It wasn't an offer of help. It wasn't a promise of victory. It was a command. And for the first time in weeks, instead of fear, she felt a fragile, unfamiliar spark of hope ignite within the darkness. The King County Courthouse was a monument of grey stone and imposing columns designed to make the individual feel small and insignificant. On this Tuesday morning, it was succeeding brilliantly. Olivia, clutching a worn leather satchel containing every financial document she owned, felt her resolve crumbling with every step up the granite staircase. Her 7 a.m. meeting with Eleanor Vance had been as intimidating as the email. The office was a study in stark minimalism, concrete floors, glass walls, and a single formidable black desk. Eleanor Vance was older than Olivia had imagined, perhaps in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. Her silver hair was cut in a severe, elegant bob, and she wore a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. She hadn't offered coffee or condolences. She'd simply taken Olivia's files and said, "Tell me everything. Omit nothing." For an hour, Olivia spoke, her voice gaining strength as Eleanor listened with unnerving stillness. The lawyer didn't take notes. She just watched her gaze intense, as if committing every word, every hesitation to memory. When Olivia finished, Eleanor stood up. Your husband is not just an adulterer, Mrs. Reed," she said, her voice a low, precise hum. "He's a thief, but he's a careful one. We have a long fight ahead. Today we simply stop the bleeding." She glanced at her watch. "It's 8:45. Let's go." As they walked towards courtroom 4B, Eleanor gave her one instruction. "No matter what happens, no matter what they say or do, you look at me. Do not look at him. Do not look at her. Your focus is on me. Understood?" Olivia nodded, her throat too tight for words. They were late. Intentionally so, Olivia realized. Mr. Peterson was already at their table, looking pale and sweating under the fluorescent lights. He scrambled to his feet when he saw them, his eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of Eleanor Vance. Across the aisle, Nathaniel was the picture of confidence. He wore a custom navy suit, his posture relaxed, his hand resting on the back of the chair beside him. In that chair sat Sophia Vance. She was younger than Olivia, with glossy black hair and a predatory smile. She was dressed in a vibrant red dress, a deliberate garish splash of color in the muted courtroom. She leaned over and whispered something in Nathaniel's ear, and they both chuckled. Then Sophia's eyes met Olivia's from across the room. She didn't look away. She held Olivia's gaze and smiled a slow, triumphant smirk. It was a smile of utter contempt. Judge Thompson, a weary man with a perpetually stern expression, called the court to order. Nathaniel's lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Arthur Davies, rose to his feet. "Your Honor, we are here today on a simple matter. My client, Mr. Nathaniel Reed, has filed for divorce. We have also filed a motion for the temporary exclusive use and possession of the marital home, which is in fact an asset of Viridian Dynamics. Mrs. Reed has refused to vacate." As he spoke, Sophia leaned towards Nathaniel again, her red-painted lips close to his ear. A bright, cruel laugh escaped her. It wasn't loud, but in the tense silence of the courtroom, it cut through the air like a shard of glass. It was the sound of victory, of humiliation, of a woman who believed she held all the cards. Olivia flinched the sound of physical blow. Her eyes filled with tears and her gaze instinctively darted toward Nathaniel. But then she remembered the command. "Look at me." She forced her head to turn her tear-filled eyes, meeting the cool, steady grey of Eleanor Vance's. Eleanor gave a barely perceptible nod, a silent command to hold fast. "Mr. Davies," Judge Thompson said, his voice laced with annoyance at the interruption. "Control your associates." Nathaniel whispered something to Sophia, who stifled another giggle with her hand, her eyes dancing with amusement. And then the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a decisive thud. Every head turned. Framed in the doorway stood Olivia Reed. The courtroom held its breath. Olivia, who they all thought was the weeping woman sitting beside the no-name lawyer, was walking in. Her steps were slow but steady, her navy dress hugging the full curve of her pregnant belly. Her face, though pale, was set with a new, unfamiliar determination. And beside her, matching her stride for stride, was Eleanor Vance. The room erupted in whispers. Mr. Peterson, still sitting at the table, looked utterly bewildered. Arthur Davies stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging slightly open. But the most profound reaction came from the other side of the aisle. Nathaniel's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stark disbelief. His face went white. Sophia Vance froze her hand still near her mouth. Her laughing eyes were now wide with a dawning, sickening horror. She stared at the woman walking down the aisle. the woman whose reputation was the stuff of nightmares in the legal world. And she stared at the woman whose last name was the same as her own. Eleanor Vance walked to the plaintiff's table, placing a hand on Olivia's shoulder in a gesture of both support and possession. She then addressed the utterly baffled judge. "Your Honor." Her voice was calm, clear, and cut through the murmuring like a scalpel. "My apologies for the theatricality. My client, Mrs. Olivia Reed, and I are now present. Please strike the appearance of Mr. Peterson. I am Eleanor Vance, and I will be representing Mrs. Reed in this matter." She turned her head slowly, her gaze sweeping past Nathaniel and landing squarely on the woman in red. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Eleanor's face, a cold, hard glint of disdain. "And I see," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "that my little sister is keeping interesting company." Sophia Vance's face crumpled. The laughter was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated fear. The game had just changed, and she was no longer a player. She was the target. The silence in Judge Thompson's courtroom was absolute. It was as if Eleanor Vance's words had sucked all the air from the room. Arthur Davies, Nathaniel's high-priced lawyer, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his usual glib confidence completely deserting him. Nathaniel's face was a mask of chalky white, his eyes darting from the imperious woman standing before the bench to the terrified face of his mistress, Sophia. Sophia looked physically ill. The vibrant red of her dress now seemed garish and desperate. The family connection, a secret she had presumably kept from Nathaniel, was now laid bare in the most public and damaging way possible. Her own sister, the legendary legal mind she had likely bragged about in private, was now her enemy. Judge Thompson was the first to recover. He peered over his spectacles, his tired eyes now sharp and intensely focused on Eleanor. He knew the name. Everyone in the Seattle legal community knew the name. "Ms. Vance," he said, his tone shifting from bored impatience to grudging respect. "Welcome. This is an unexpected development." "Injustice is often unexpected, Your Honor," Eleanor replied smoothly, taking her place beside Olivia. She arranged a single slim file on the table before her. "Mr. Davies was making a motion regarding my client's home. I'd like to address it." "Of course," the judge said, leaning forward. "The claim that the property at 142 Shoreline Drive is an asset of Viridian Dynamics is a fascinating piece of fiction." Eleanor began, her voice even and methodical. "It is indeed owned by an LLC, Shoreline Holdings, to be precise. An LLC registered not to Viridian, but to a parent company, NR Ventures, which is of course wholly owned by Mr. Reed himself. A standard maneuver to shield personal assets. However," she paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "What my sister and Mr. Reed may not have been aware of is that when they used the Shoreline Holdings account to purchase a $70,000 diamond bracelet from Tiffany's for Miss Vance last Christmas, a gift which I'm sure was for client relations, they created a co-mingling of funds so egregious that it effectively pierces the corporate veil." Arthur Davies shot to his feet. "Objection. That's unsubstantiated. This is a preliminary hearing, not a discovery deposition." Eleanor didn't even look at him. She slid a piece of paper from her file and handed it to the bailiff. "It's entirely substantiated, Your Honor. This is a copy of the receipt and the bank transfer record. Obtained legally, I assure you." Judge Thompson examined the paper, his eyebrows climbing his forehead. He looked at Nathaniel, whose jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle ticked furiously in his cheek. "But that is a minor point," Eleanor continued, waving a dismissive hand. "The real issue with Mr. Davies's motion to have my pregnant client evicted is that it's an act of bad faith intended to intimidate and harass, an act that speaks to a pattern of behavior." She pulled out a second document. "This, Your Honor, is a sworn affidavit. It's from a Mr. Robert Miller, the former CFO of Viridian Dynamics. He was fired 2 months ago." Nathaniel flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but Eleanor saw it. "Mr. Miller was fired, you see, because he refused to authorize the creation of a new offshore entity in the Cayman Islands, an entity Mr. Reed insisted was for international expansion, but which Mr. Miller believed was for the explicit purpose of hiding marital assets in anticipation of this very divorce. Interestingly, the person who insisted on Mr. Miller's termination and personally escorted him from the building was Mr. Reed's executive assistant, Ms. Sophia Vance. The second blow landed harder than the first. It connected the affair directly to corporate malfeasance and a conspiracy to commit fraud against Olivia. It was no longer just a messy divorce. It was potentially criminal. "Objection," Davies almost shouted, his voice cracking. "This is slander hearsay." "We have no knowledge of this affidavit." "You do now," Eleanor said coolly, passing a copy to him. His hands trembled slightly as he took it. "We are filing a temporary restraining order, Your Honor, to freeze all personal and corporate assets of both Mr. Reed and NR Ventures, pending a full forensic audit. We believe Mr. Reed has systematically defrauded my client for years, using his company as a personal piggy bank with the active participation of his mistress." The judge looked from the affidavit to Nathaniel, his expression now one of open disgust. Nathaniel Reed had walked into this courtroom a powerful man, expecting to crush his emotionally distraught wife. In the span of 10 minutes, Eleanor Vance had reframed him as a common thief and a conspirator with his lover as his accomplice. "Mr. Davies," Judge Thompson said, his voice dangerously low, "in light of this information, your motion to evict a heavily pregnant woman from her home is not only denied, it's offensive. I'm granting Ms. Vance's motion for a temporary asset freeze effective immediately. A hearing on the matter will be scheduled for 2 weeks from now. I suggest you get your client's affairs in order. And, Mr. Reed," he added, his gaze like chips of ice, "I would strongly advise against any contact with your wife or any potential witnesses in this case." He banged the gavel, the sound echoing the finality of a coffin nail being hammered into place. Court was adjourned. Nathaniel sat frozen in his chair, his face ashen. Arthur Davies was frantically whispering to him, but he didn't seem to hear. His eyes were fixed on Olivia. For the first time, he wasn't looking at her with contempt or pity, but with something that looked terrifyingly like fear. Sophia was already on her feet, gathering her purse, her movements jerky and panicked. She didn't look at Nathaniel. She looked at her sister. Eleanor met her gaze with a look of pure, unadulterated ice. There was no family there, no shared history, only the cold promise of a reckoning. Sophia turned and practically fled the courtroom. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Olivia's arm. "The first cut is the deepest," she murmured for Olivia's ears only. "Now they will bleed." Olivia looked down at her hands, which were steady for the first time in weeks. The cold dread that had been her constant companion was gone, replaced by the warmth of a fire just beginning to burn. The 2 weeks between the hearings were a whirlwind of legal activity. Eleanor Vance's office became Olivia's sanctuary and war room. The glass walls were soon covered in whiteboards, detailing complex webs of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and suspicious transactions. Eleanor and her team of forensic accountants, a group of sharp, relentless individuals who seemed to subsist entirely on caffeine and a thirst for justice, worked around the clock. They were not just lawyers. They were archaeologists digging through the fossil record of Nathaniel's greed. The asset freeze had sent Nathaniel and his company into a tailspin. With his accounts locked, he couldn't move. Money couldn't cover his tracks. He was trapped. The discovery process began, and Eleanor was merciless. The deposition of Nathaniel Reed was a masterclass in psychological demolition. It took place in a sterile conference room in Eleanor's firm. Nathaniel arrived with Arthur Davies, trying to project an aura of bored indignation, as if this were all a trivial annoyance. "Mr. Reed," Eleanor began, her voice deceptively mild, "let's talk about a property. Your company, Viridian Dynamics, leases in Aspen, Colorado. A ski chalet. Can you tell me its business purpose? It's for executive retreats and high-value client entertainment," Nathaniel answered smoothly, reciting a well-rehearsed line. "I see," Eleanor said, sliding a photograph across the table. It was an Instagram post from a private account. The account belonged to Sophia. The photo showed her and Nathaniel wrapped in ski gear, kissing in front of a roaring fire. The chalet was unmistakably the one in question. The caption read, "My king, treating me to a private getaway. Best life, love." The post was dated during a week Nathaniel had told Olivia he was at a tech symposium in Berlin. Nathaniel's composure cracked. "My personal life is not relevant to this case." "Your personal life became relevant when you started funding it with corporate assets that are 50% my client's marital property. Mr. Reed," Eleanor countered, her voice hardening. "This chalet, leased for $20,000 a month by Viridian, was used as your personal love nest. Shall we go through the catering receipts? The private ski instructor you hired for Miss Vance. The case of Dom Perignon, charged to the corporate account as office supplies. For 6 hours, she dismantled him, piece by piece. Every lie he had ever told, every dollar he had tried to hide, was brought into the harsh light of the deposition room. She presented flight manifests, showing him and Sophia flying first class to the Maldives on the company dime. She produced credit card statements detailing thousands of dollars spent at Cartier Chanel and Hermes, all for Sophia, all classified as business development expenses. Next was Sophia's deposition. She arrived trying to look like a victim, dressed in a conservative grey suit, her demeanor subdued. She attempted to paint herself as a naive young employee, swept up by a powerful, charismatic boss. "I loved him," she said, dabbing at a dry eye with a tissue. "I thought he was going to leave his wife. He told me their marriage was over long before I came along." Eleanor let her speak, her expression unreadable. When Sophia was finished with her soliloquy, Eleanor leaned forward. "Ms. Vance," she said, the use of her own surname, a deliberate twist of the knife. "You and I grew up in the same house. I know for a fact you are many things, but naive is not one of them. Let's talk about your promotion to executive assistant." "I earned it," Sophia said quickly. "Did you?" Eleanor asked. "Or was it a condition of your silence after you discovered Mr. Reed was embezzling funds to cover a series of bad personal investments in 2023? "We have the emails, Sophia. The ones you sent from a burner account to his private email detailing the wire transfers and suggesting he promote you to a position where you could help manage the optics. You weren't his victim. You were his co-conspirator. It was blackmail, wasn't it?" Sophia's face drained of all color. She looked at her sister, the woman whose childhood she had made a misery with her selfishness and lies. She had stolen money from their parents. She had spread vicious rumors about Eleanor in college. This was not the first time her greed had led to a confrontation with her older sister, but it would be the last. I want a lawyer. Sophia stammered, her voice a pathetic whisper. You should have gotten one weeks ago, Eleanor said, leaning back in her chair. The district attorney's office will be very interested in those emails. The web wasn't just unraveling. It was tightening into a noose. They discovered that Nathaniel, with Sophia's help, had created a phantom employee on the Viridian payroll. The salary, a hefty 6 figures, was being direct deposited into an account in Sophia's name. They had siphoned close to $500,000 this way. During this time, Olivia found a strange, quiet strength. She spent her days at Eleanor's office not as a client, but as part of the team. Her pre-marriage career had been in architectural design, and her eye for detail was meticulous. She pored over blueprints for office buildings Nathaniel claimed as corporate assets, proving they were empty shells with no tenants designed solely to inflate the company's value. She found inconsistencies in expense reports that even the accountants had missed. She was no longer just a victim of Nathaniel's betrayal. She was an active architect of his downfall. One evening, as Olivia was organizing a mountain of evidence, Eleanor came and sat beside her. You have a good eye, the lawyer said. It was the closest she had ever come to a compliment. I just want this to be over. Olivia confessed, her hand resting on her belly. For him. I know, Eleanor said, her gaze softening for a moment. I took this case because of the letter you wrote. Because of the injustice, but also because of her. My sister has been a force of chaos her entire life, leaving wreckage in her wake. Our parents enabled her, cleaned up her messes. I cut her off years ago, but I see now that was a mistake. I just allowed her to find a bigger mess to make. This time the wreckage stops with her. You and your son deserve a clean slate. It was a glimpse behind the armor, a shared moment of understanding between two women, bound together by the destructive actions of others. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that they were going to win. The mountain of evidence compiled by Eleanor's team was more like an avalanche waiting to happen. The initial divorce proceeding had morphed into a full-blown criminal investigation. The district attorney's office, armed with the sworn affidavit from the ex-CFO, and the damning emails Eleanor had uncovered, had opened a formal case against Nathaniel Reed and Viridian Dynamics for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Nathaniel was cornered. His assets were frozen, his reputation was in tatters, and he was facing the very real possibility of a prison sentence. The arrogance and confidence he had displayed in that first court appearance were gone, replaced by the quiet, desperate panic of a trapped animal. His lawyer, Arthur Davies, seeing the overwhelming evidence, knew that a trial would be a slaughter. His only play was a deal. The meeting was arranged in a neutral conference room, halfway between the two law firms. Olivia was there, sitting silently beside Eleanor. She felt no fear, only a strange, detached calm. Across the table, Nathaniel looked gaunt, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. He wouldn't meet Olivia's eyes. My client is prepared to offer a settlement, Davies began, his voice strained. A generous one. He slid a proposal across the table. Eleanor glanced at it for a fraction of a second before pushing it back. This is an insult. We're not here to negotiate percentages of stolen money, Arthur. We are here to discuss a complete and total capitulation. Now see here, Davies blustered. My client is a respected businessman. Your client is a common thief who is about to be indicted. Eleanor cut him off, her voice like Umstultil. He will give my client the house unencumbered. He will fund a trust for his son with $10 million. He will pay a lifetime of alimony commensurate with the lifestyle he established, and he will cover all legal fees. In return, Mrs. Reed will release all civil claims against him. The criminal charges, however, that is a matter for the DA. Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice raspy. 10 million. That's insane. It would ruin me. You ruined yourself, Nathaniel, Olivia said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying across the silent room. You did this. He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a flicker of the man she once loved, now twisted by desperation. He saw no path out, and so, like all cowards, he looked for someone else to sacrifice. It wasn't all me, he said, his voice dropping. Sophia. She was the one who came up with the phantom employee idea. She managed the accounts. She pushed me to hide the assets. She was ambitious. She knew everything. Davies tried to silence him, but Nathaniel was on a roll, the words tumbling out in a frantic, self-serving cascade. She was the one who shredded the documents from the old CFO. I have proof. I have a recording. She was bragging about it. It was the ultimate betrayal. The man Sophia had hitched her future to the man she had helped defraud and humiliate his wife for, was now turning on her, completely offering her up to the lions to save his own skin. He was a fox caught in a trap, willing to chew off his own leg, or in this case his accomplices, to get free. Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable. She had anticipated this. She knew both their characters intimately. Nathaniel the narcissist would never take the fall alone, and Sophia the opportunist would be his easiest scapegoat. A recording, Eleanor prompted, her voice neutral. Yes, Nathaniel said eagerly, seeing a glimmer of hope. On my phone. She's talking to a friend, laughing about how she has me wrapped around her finger, how she's going to be set for life. She details the entire scheme. And there it was, the final pathetic act of a pathetic man. He would send his lover to prison to reduce his own sentence. 2 days later, based on the evidence provided by Nathaniel as part of his plea bargain, police officers arrived at Sophia Vance's luxury downtown apartment, an apartment paid for by Viridian Dynamics. She was arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. The images on the evening news were stark. The glamorous mistress no longer laughing, being led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and terror. She looked small and alone, the vibrant red dress from the courtroom replaced by a rumpled tracksuit. The king she had bet on had sacrificed her without a second thought. Olivia watched the news report from the comfort of her own living room in the house she now knew she would keep. She felt no satisfaction, no triumphant glee. She just felt a profound sadness for the utter hollowness of the lives they had built. They had chased wealth and status, and in the end, they had devoured each other. She placed a hand on her belly, where her son gave a reassuring kick. Her future was not about revenge. It was about him. It was about building a new life, a real one, on the ashes of the old. The storm was finally passing. The final settlement was signed not in a courtroom, but in the quiet, sunlit conference room of Eleanor Vance's firm. The fight was over. Nathaniel, having thrown Sophia to the wolves, had agreed to every single one of Eleanor's terms. He had saved himself from a long prison sentence, but he was a broken man. He would serve 2 years in a minimum security facility for corporate fraud. His company would be dismantled by receivers, and his name would forever be synonymous with disgrace. Olivia signed the last page of the thick document, her hand steady. The house was hers. Her son's future was secure. She was free. As Nathaniel was escorted out by his lawyer, a stooped figure who was a pale imitation of the Titan who had walked into court months ago. He paused at the door and looked back at Olivia. "I did love you once, you know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Olivia met his gaze not with hatred, but with a calm, clear-eyed pity. "The man I loved would never have done this, Nathaniel. That man has been gone for a very long time." He flinched, nodded once, and was gone. After the room had cleared, only Olivia and Eleanor remained. The late afternoon sun streamed through the glass walls, casting long shadows across the room. "It's done," Olivia said softly, the reality of it finally sinking in. "Yes, it is," Eleanor replied. She came over and stood by Olivia, looking out at the Seattle skyline. "Sophia took a plea deal. She'll serve 18 months. She testified against him, of course. A final fitting act of self-preservation." "Are you okay?" Olivia asked, sensing the complex emotions behind the lawyer's stoic facade. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "My sister made her choices a long time ago," she said finally. "I have mourned the loss of her for years. What I did was not for me or even against her. It was for the principle of the matter. People like Nathaniel and Sophia believe the rules don't apply to them. They believe they can build their lives on the wreckage of others. It is important from time to time to show them that they are wrong, that foundations matter." She turned to Olivia, a rare small smile touching her lips. "You, Mrs. Reed, have an excellent foundation. You have integrity and a strength you didn't know you possessed. That is worth more than all the money he tried to hide." Eleanor slid a simple business card across the table. "My personal number. Should you or your son ever need anything at all." It was a gesture of profound respect, an acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged between them in the crucible of the past few months. 3 months later, Olivia brought her son Benjamin home from the hospital. She brought him home to the house she had fought for, to the nursery she had finished decorating herself. The room was filled with soft blues and yellows, and a mobile of handcrafted wooden stars hung over the crib. It was a space of peace and promise. Holding her sleeping son in her arms, she stood by the large window overlooking the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the vast open sky. The past year had been a tempest, a storm that had torn her life down to its studs. But now, standing here, she realized it had also cleared away all the lies, all the illusions. She was not the naive, trusting woman she had been. She was a survivor, a mother, a warrior who had faced down dragons and won. She had walked into that courtroom, a victim, pregnant and terrified, facing a future of ruin. She had walked out the architect of a new life, one built not on a man's promises, but on her own unshakable foundation of strength. As Ben stirred in her arms, making a soft, contented sound, Olivia smiled. The future was no longer a terrifying unknown. It was a blank page, and for the first time in a long time, she couldn't wait to write what came next. The victory Olivia discovered was not a finish line, but a new starting point. The quiet that settled over her life in the months after Ben's birth was a welcome reprieve, but it was also a space where the echoes of the past sometimes grew loud. Healing, she learned, was not a linear path. It was a dance between the profound, all-consuming love she felt for her son and the phantom limb of a life that had been violently amputated. There were nights during the 3 a.m. feedings when the house was so still she could hear her own heartbeat. She would sit in the rocking chair, Ben's warm, milk-scented body nestled against hers, and feel a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This tiny, perfect human was her anchor, her true north. But then a car would backfire on the street outside, and for a split second her heart would seize with the memory of the courier's van of the papers that had shattered her world. The trauma had left hairline fractures on her soul, invisible to the eye, but still tender to the touch. She was slowly reclaiming the house. The home office, once Nathaniel's domain of power and deceit, had been the hardest part. For weeks she kept the door closed. One day, fueled by a surge of resolve, she'd opened it, the scent of his expensive leather chair and faint cologne still clinging to the air. She spent the next 2 days methodically dismantling it. She donated the furniture, tore out the heavy mahogany bookshelves, and had the room repainted in a soft, calming shade of cream. It sat empty for a month, a blank canvas, its ghosts exorcised. Her relationship with Eleanor Vance evolved in unexpected ways. The fierce lawyer, who had surgically dismantled her enemies, became a quiet, almost grandmotherly presence in her life. Eleanor sent a ridiculously lavish gift when Ben was born, a first-edition set of classic children's books, bound in blue leather. 2 months later she called. "I find myself with an unscheduled afternoon, Olivia," she'd said, her voice retaining its usual precision. "I'd like to see the dividend on our investment." Eleanor arrived not in a power suit, but in tailored grey slacks and a cashmere sweater, looking more like a university professor than a legal shark. She held Ben with a surprising gentle confidence, her sharp eyes softening as she looked at his sleeping face. "He has your resilience," Eleanor observed, handing him back to Olivia. "You can see it in his brow. He won't be easily trifled with." They sat in the living room, the one Olivia had fought to keep, and drank tea. Eleanor's gaze drifted towards the empty room down the hall. "The office?" she asked. "I cleared it out," Olivia said. "I'm not sure what to do with it yet." "What did you do before all this?" Eleanor asked, though Olivia knew she already had the answer. "I was an architect," Olivia replied, the words feeling foreign. "Residential design. I haven't picked up a pencil in almost 2 years. A foundation is a difficult thing to build," Eleanor said, her eyes meeting Olivia's. "It requires a clear vision of what you want the structure to withstand. You've just survived a Category 5 hurricane, Olivia. It's natural to be hesitant about drawing new blueprints, but you must. A life cannot be lived in an empty room." The conversation stayed with Olivia, turning over and over in her mind. That evening, after putting Ben to bed, she retrieved a portfolio from deep within her closet. She unzipped it, the smell of graphite and paper, a welcome nostalgia. Her old drawings were inside, filled with light and clean lines. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of her old self. The woman who existed before the titles of wife and victim had been forced upon her. A week later, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from a federal correctional institution. The handwriting was neat, familiar, and utterly chilling. It was from Nathaniel. Her first instinct was to burn it. Her second, born of a need for finality, was to read it. She waited until Ben was asleep, then sat at her kitchen island, the single sheet of paper trembling in her hand. It was not the letter of a remorseful man. It was a masterpiece of self-pity and subtle manipulation. He wrote of the loneliness of his cell, of the injustice of his sentence when so many others do worse. He wrote about Sophia, calling her a poison that had infected his judgment. He claimed to think of Olivia and his son every day. He ended by saying he hoped one day she could find it in her heart to forgive him not for him, but for her own peace. The words were designed to make her feel guilty, to position him as a fallen man worthy of her sympathy. A year ago it might have worked, but the woman reading the letter was not the same one he had married. She saw every calculated phrase, every attempt to shift blame. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. She read it once, then a second time, feeling the last vestiges of his power over her turn to ash. He was an echo, a ghost story she would one day tell her son about the importance of character and integrity. She stood up, walked to the empty room, and tore the letter into tiny, insignificant pieces, letting them fall like snow onto the bare floor. Then she went back to her portfolio. She pulled out a fresh sheet of vellum, a ruler and a pencil. As the moon cast a silvery glow across the floor, she began to sketch. She designed a large drafting table to sit where his desk once was. She drew floor-to-ceiling shelves for books on design and art, not law and finance. She drew a small playpen for Ben in the corner, bathed in the light from the window. She was drawing a room not just for her work, but for her life. A space where a mother could also be a creator, where a survivor could be a visionary. She was drawing her new foundation, and this time she was the sole architect. That's the incredible story of Olivia Reed, a woman who turned her deepest betrayal into her greatest victory. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. When faced with public humiliation and financial ruin, Olivia discovered a resilience she never knew she had, proving that integrity and courage are weapons that even the most powerful bullies can't defeat. Her journey from a heartbroken wife to a triumphant mother is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. If Olivia's story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama. What part of Olivia's story moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. The anonymous email landed in my inbox at 2:17 a.m. The subject line was just 2 words, St. Jude's. Inside there was no text, only a link. A link to a video that would detonate my life. It was raw, grainy security footage from the maternity ward of the very hospital where my husband Michael had supposedly mourned the loss of our stillborn son just 3 weeks earlier. But the video didn't show a grieving father. It showed a man I barely recognized, his face etched, not with sorrow, but with a chilling, frantic energy. And the woman he was, with her hand clutching his. That woman wasn't me. They say the truth sets you free. But as I watched that footage, all I felt was the cold, hard reality of a lie so monstrous it would unravel not just a marriage, but the very fabric of who I thought we were. My world, the one I had so meticulously curated, was painted in shades of beige and pottery barn. It was a world of scented candles, Sunday brunches, and the soft cashmere-wrapped dream of impending motherhood. Michael and I were that couple, the ones whose Christmas cards made other people vaguely resentful. He was a successful architect, all sharp lines and even sharper suits, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. I was a freelance graphic designer, a profession that allowed me the flexibility to obsess over paint swatches for the nursery, and to scroll endlessly through baby name forums. Our life in our sprawling suburban home just outside of Austin, Texas, was a testament to shared ambition, and I thought shared love. We'd met in college, a whirlwind romance that had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a decade-long marriage. We'd weathered his demanding career, my brief but intense flirtation with opening a bakery, and the quiet, creeping anxiety of trying for a baby. When the 2 pink lines finally appeared on the pregnancy test, it felt less like a surprise and more like a hard-won victory. Michael had wept. He'd dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to my still flat stomach, whispering promises to our unborn child. He was an exemplary, expectant father. He assembled the crib with an engineer's precision, attended every Lamaze class, and learned to expertly massage my swollen ankles. He'd talk to my belly for hours, telling our son, whom we'd already named Caleb, about the world he was about to enter. The pregnancy was, for the most part, idyllic. I'd lean into the stereotype craving pickles and ice cream, and Michael would dutifully make midnight runs to the 24-hour grocery store. Our friends Mark and Sarah, who had 2 boisterous toddlers of their own, would watch us with a knowing, almost pitying fondness. "Just you wait," Mark would chuckle, ruffling Michael's hair. "Sleep now. You'll thank me later." The first fissure in our perfect world appeared so subtly, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about a month before my due date. Michael called, his voice strained. "Sweetheart, I have to fly out to Chicago. A last-minute thing with the Harrison project. A major investor is threatening to pull out." Chicago now. I'd asked, a knot of disappointment tightening in my chest. We had a birthing class that evening. "I know, I'm so sorry, Amelia. I wouldn't go if it wasn't a 5-alarm fire. I'll be back Thursday, I promise. I love you. I love you both." He was so convincing, so genuinely apologetic, that I'd pushed my unease aside. It was his job. It was our future. But then, a few days after he was supposed to have returned, I was scrolling through Instagram. A girl I'd gone to college with, a bubbly blonde named Chloe Jenkins, who now worked in PR in Chicago, had posted a story. A picture of a crowded, trendy cocktail bar, the kind with Edison bulbs and artisanal gin, and there in the background, unmistakable even in the blurry periphery, was Michael. He was laughing, his head tilted back, a drink in his hand. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a casual Henley, the one I always said brought out the blue in his eyes. And his arm was draped casually around the shoulders of a striking redhead I'd never seen before. My blood ran cold. I took a screenshot, my fingers trembling. When I confronted him, showing him the picture, he didn't even flinch. He looked at me with those earnest blue eyes and laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Amy, sweetheart, you're seeing things. That's not even me." "Michael, I know what you look like. It's a blurry photo. It's some guy who looks like me." And Chloe. "You know, she's always been a bit of a drama queen. Probably just trying to stir something up." He pulled me into a hug, stroking my hair. "You're hormonal, baby. It's okay. I was in meetings the entire time. I was miserable. I missed you and Caleb every second." He was so good. So plausible. He showed me his expense reports. A string of Uber rides to a bland corporate office park, a dinner for one at a generic steakhouse. He had an answer for everything. I wanted to believe him. The alternative was a chasm I wasn't ready to face. So I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the impending birth was making me irrational. I deleted the screenshot. I apologized. And I tucked the incident away in a dark corner of my mind, a place I refused to visit. 2 weeks later, I went into labor. It was premature, a full 3 weeks early, but the doctors at St. Jude's Medical Center weren't overly concerned. The contractions came hard and fast. Michael was by my side, a rock. He held my hand. He breathed with me. He whispered encouragement. He was the perfect husband, the perfect father-to-be. The hours blurred into a haze of pain and fear. There were complications. The baby's heart rate was dropping. The calm, reassuring voices of the nurses started to take on a sharper edge. The room filled with more people. I remember the anesthesiologist's kind eyes, the cold sting of the epidural. I remember the doctor, a woman with a stern but compassionate face, saying, "We need to get him out now." Then nothing. A black, empty void. I woke up in a quiet, dimly lit room. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was gone. The bustling energy of the labor ward had been replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness. Michael was slumped in a chair by my bed, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. "Michael?" My voice was a dry, raspy whisper. He looked up, and his face broke me. It was a mask of utter devastation. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Tears streamed down his cheeks unheeded. "He's gone, Amy." He choked out, his voice thick with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "Caleb, he didn't make it." The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless syllables that my brain refused to assemble into a coherent thought. I looked down at my body, at the flat expanse of my stomach beneath the thin hospital blanket. The life that had been there, the kicks and flutters that had become the rhythm of my days, was gone. The doctor came in and explained it in gentle clinical terms. Placental abruption, a rare catastrophic event. There was nothing anyone could have done. It was no one's fault. They were so sorry for my loss. The days that followed were a blur of unimaginable pain. I was a ghost, haunting the corridors of my own life. The nursery, once a room of joyful anticipation, became a mausoleum. Every tiny onesie, every perfectly folded blanket was a dagger to my heart. Michael was my shadow, my keeper. He handled everything. The hospital paperwork, the funeral arrangements, a small private service that I was too sedated to fully comprehend. He fielded the calls from concerned friends and family. He held me when I woke up screaming in the night. He seemed to be drowning in his own sea of grief. He lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He'd sit for hours in the rocking chair in the nursery, just staring at the empty crib. He was the very picture of a bereaved father, and I clung to him. His grief was the only thing that validated my own. We were in this together, two shipwrecked survivors on a desolate shore. Our shared loss was the fragile raft that kept us afloat. I needed his pain to be as real as mine. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that had suddenly cruelly stopped making sense. The lie was perfect. It was seamless, comprehensive, and utterly devastatingly believable. He had built a fortress of sorrow around us, and I, his willing prisoner, had never once thought to check if the walls were real. The first 3 weeks after we lost Caleb were a suffocating fog. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept marked only by the rising and setting of the sun, which I mostly observed from the cocoon of my bed. Michael was my constant, my warden of grief, He brought me meals I didn't eat, coaxed me into showers I didn't want, and filled the silence with a steady stream of soothing, empty words. We'll get through this, Amy. He'll always be our son. I love you so much. His performance was flawless. He never missed a beat. When my mother came to stay for a week, her own face a mirror of my sorrow, she'd watch Michael with tear-filled eyes. "You're a good man, Michael," she'd whispered to him in the kitchen one afternoon, a moment I overheard from the top of the stairs. "Thank God Amelia has you." He'd even begun to channel his grief into a project. He announced one evening, his voice heavy but resolute, that he was designing a memorial garden for the hospital, a place for parents like us. He'd said, his gaze distant, a place to remember the children we never got to hold. He'd spend hours at his drafting table, sketching intricate plans for fountains and benches and flower beds. It was all so noble, so heartbreakingly poignant. But grief is a strange and unpredictable beast. In its initial all-consuming phase, it blinds you. But as the raw, visceral agony begins to recede, even slightly, a new kind of clarity can emerge. Your senses, dulled by shock, slowly begin to sharpen. You start to notice things, small things, inconsistencies. The first crack was small, almost imperceptible. It was a bill, an itemized statement from the hospital. I'd found it in the mail which Michael had taken to sorting through before I saw it, to protect you from any unnecessary stress, he'd said. This one had apparently slipped through his filtration system. I scanned the list of charges, a morbid curiosity compelling me to relive the trauma in black and white. Anesthesia, operating room fees, pharmacy, and then a line item that made me pause. NICU, level 3 care, 3 days. NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. I frowned. Why would Caleb have been in the NICU? The doctor had been clear. It was a stillbirth. He was gone before he was born. There was no care, intensive or otherwise. I assumed it was a clerical error, a common enough occurrence in the bureaucratic labyrinth of healthcare. But the detail lodged itself in my mind, a tiny burr under the skin. The second crack appeared a few days later. Sarah, my best friend, came over bearing a casserole and a bottle of wine she knew I wouldn't drink. She sat with me on the couch, letting the silence hang comfortably between us, before she finally spoke. "How are you really?" she asked, her voice gentle. I gave her my standard, non-committal answer. "Getting by." She nodded, her eyes full of a sympathy that for the first time felt a little off. There was something else there, a hesitation, a flicker of pity. No, that wasn't it. It was something closer to discomfort. "Amy," she began, choosing her words carefully. "When Michael called us from the hospital, he was a wreck. Mark and we wanted to come right away, but Michael was so insistent. He said you didn't want to see anyone, that you needed space." "I did," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't face anyone." "I get that," she said quickly. "Of course I do." But he said something else. Something odd. I waited, my body tensing. "He said that they had Caleb on life support," she said, her brow furrowed in confusion. "He said you were both just waiting, making a decision. He was asking Mark about what that was like to let go." The casserole on my lap suddenly felt like a lead weight. Life support. A decision. This was a narrative I hadn't heard, a version of the story that diverged wildly from the one I had been told. "He must have been confused," I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. He was in shock. We all were. "Of course," Sarah said immediately, backing down, sensing my distress. "That must be it. Oh, Amy, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have even brought it up. It's just... it stuck with me." But it stuck with me, too. It joined the NICU charge, another piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Michael on the phone with Mark, fabricating a story about our son on life support, played on a loop in my head. Why? Why would he lie about something so specific, so sacred? Was his grief so profound it had created false memories? Or was it something else, the memory of the Instagram photo from Chicago, the one I had so willingly dismissed, resurfaced with a vengeance? The laughing man with his arm around the redhead. "You're hormonal, baby. It's some guy who looks like me." My hands started to tremble. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michael, who was sleeping soundly, a picture of peaceful exhaustion. I tiptoed into his home office, the room where he was designing his memorial garden, a sanctuary of his supposed sorrow. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent house. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I had to look. His laptop was closed on his desk. I opened it. It was password protected, of course. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried Caleb. The screen unlocked. A wave of nausea washed over me, using our dead son's name as a password. The thought was both sickening and, in a twisted way, perfectly in character with the grieving father he was pretending to be. His email was already open. I felt a pang of guilt, a lifetime of respecting his privacy, warring with the gnawing suspicion that was now consuming me. I clicked on his sent folder. There were emails to contractors about the memorial garden, emails to his colleagues, thanking them for their condolences. And then I saw it. A thread of emails with a woman named Jenna Reed. My breath hitched. The redhead from the Instagram photo. The emails went back months. They started professionally enough, something about a joint project between his firm and hers in Chicago. But the tone quickly shifted. They became familiar, flirty, intimate. They talked about meeting for drinks for dinner. They talked about her recent divorce. They talked about how alive he felt when he was with her. I scrolled down, my vision blurring with tears. The dates were a brutal chronological indictment. There was an email from the day he'd supposedly flown to Chicago for his 5-alarm fire meeting. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: "On my way, wheels up. Can't wait to see you. Counting the minutes. Ditch the boring conference dinner tonight. I found a place I think you'll love." And then I found the emails from the week Caleb had died. He'd been emailing her from the hospital, while I was in labor, while I was in surgery, while I was lying in a drugged haze, believing he was by my side, drowning in grief. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: "It's happening. Amelia's in labor. It's early. This is it. Talk soon." Then a few hours later. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: "It's happening. It's a nightmare here. Complications. Don't know what's going on. I'll call you when I can." And then the email that made me physically recoil, a gasp escaping my lips. It was sent the morning after I'd been told our son was gone. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: "I need you. It's over. He didn't make it. It's for the best. I know we talked about this, the timing. It would have been impossible, but God, Jenna, it's still... I can't explain it. She's a mess. I have to be the strong one here. I have to play the part. But all I can think about is you. All I want is to be with you. This whole thing, it just makes me realize I can't live this lie anymore. As soon as I can, I'm coming to you. It's for the best. The timing. It would have been impossible. I have to play the part. The words swam before my eyes. The fortress he had built crumbled around me, and I saw the lie for what it was. It wasn't about shared grief. It was about an affair. It was about an exit strategy. The death of our son wasn't a tragedy he was enduring with me. It was a complication he was managing. A messy, loose end he needed to tie up so he could move on to his new life, his new woman. The NICU charge. The story about life support to Sarah and Mark. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. These weren't the ramblings of a grief-stricken mind. They were lies. Scaffolding to support a bigger, more monstrous lie. He needed a story that was dramatic, that required his constant attention, that isolated me and made him the heroic, grieving husband. A story that bought him time. My grief, which had been a raw, open wound, was suddenly eclipsed by a rage so white-hot, it was almost dizzying. The man sleeping in my bed, the man whose tears I had wiped away, the man whose hand I had clung to, as if it were a lifeline, was a stranger, a monster. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked out of the office and back into our bedroom. I stood by the bed, looking down at his sleeping face. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, and I felt a chilling, terrifying calm settle over me. The fog had lifted, and in its place was a cold, hard certainty. I didn't know what the full truth was, but I was going to find out. And I was going to burn his world to the ground. It was in this state of cold fury in the dead of night, fueled by betrayal and a desperate need for irrefutable proof, that I did something I never would have imagined myself capable of. I thought about the hospital, St. Jude's, a place of immense pain, but also a place with answers. I thought about the inconsistencies, the lies. And I thought about the one thing that doesn't lie. Cameras. I sent an anonymous email to a local investigative journalist, a woman named Isabella Rossi, whose work I'd followed, known for her tenacity in uncovering institutional malfeasance. And then I sent another one from a different burner account to a victims' rights group that specialized in medical negligence. I didn't know what would come of it, but I had planted a seed. I had lit a match. Now all I could do was wait for the explosion. It came a week later in the form of that 2:17 a.m. email. The one with the subject line, St. Jude's. The one with the link that would change everything. I clicked it, and my world went from a nightmare into a living hell. The video player loaded a stark white box against the dark screen of my laptop. There was no sound, just the silent, unblinking eye of a security camera. The timestamp in the corner read 8:14 p.m. on the day Caleb died. The angle was from high in a corner, looking down on a section of a hospital corridor. It was unmistakably St. Jude's. The same pale green walls, the same polished linoleum floors I had stared at in a daze. The sign on the wall was blurry, but I could make out the letters NICU. My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. A nurse in blue scrubs walked briskly past the camera. A doctor followed a moment later. Then from the left of the frame, Michael appeared. My Michael. He was wearing the same dark grey sweater I'd laid out for him that morning. But the man on the screen was not the devastated husband-to-be I remembered. His posture was rigid, his movements jerky and agitated. He was pacing, running a hand through his hair, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked trapped, cornered. He stopped pacing and leaned against the wall directly under the camera. He was talking animatedly, his free hand gesturing in frustration. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the panic in his body language. This was not a man waiting for news about his laboring wife. This was a man trying to control a situation that was spiraling out of his grasp. Then from the right of the frame she appeared. Jenna Reed. The redhead from the Instagram photo, the name in the emails. In the flesh. She was wearing a chic black coat, looking utterly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. She walked directly to Michael, her face a mixture of concern and impatience. I watched my breath caught in my throat as she reached him. She put a hand on his arm. He immediately flinched, pulling away, shaking his head and glancing nervously down the hallway in the direction of my delivery room. He said something to her, his expression hard and dismissive. She recoiled, her own face hardening. They began to argue, a silent, frantic pantomime of rage and recrimination. She jabbed a finger at his chest. He grabbed her wrist. She tried to pull away. It was ugly, vicious, a scene not of shared comfort, but of a clandestine meeting gone horribly wrong. This wasn't a friend offering support. This was a confrontation. And then the most damning moment of all. A doctor, the same stern-faced woman who had delivered the news of Caleb's death to me, walked towards them from the direction of the NICU. She had a clipboard in her hand. She approached Michael, her expression grave. Michael's entire demeanor shifted. The anger vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of gut-wrenching sorrow. He physically crumpled, leaning his head against the wall, covering his face with his hands. It was a performance. A switch flipped. Jenna stood by her arms crossed, watching him with a look of cold, calculating assessment. The doctor spoke to Michael for a few moments, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of compassion. She pointed back towards the NICU. Michael shook his head vehemently. The doctor spoke again, her expression turning from sympathy to something more insistent. She seemed to be urging him towards the unit. He refused again, more forcefully this time, waving a hand dismissively. He said something that made the doctor's eyes widen in disbelief. Then she simply nodded, a look of profound sadness and perhaps a touch of disgust on her face, and walked away. Once the doctor was gone, Michael straightened up. The mask of grief fell away as quickly as it had appeared. He turned back to Jenna, his face a snarl of pure fury. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her roughly down the corridor, away from the NICU, away from my room and out of the camera's frame. The video ended. I stared at the blank screen, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash. Caleb had been in the NICU. The bill was not a mistake. Sarah had not misheard. My son had been born alive. He had been alive, and he had been fighting for his life in a glass box just down the hall, and my husband, his father, had been in the corridor, arguing with his mistress. The doctor had tried to bring him to his son. She was urging him towards the unit, and he had refused. The lie was so much more monstrous than I could ever have conceived. He hadn't just lied about an affair. He hadn't just lied about the timing of Caleb's death to make his getaway easier. He had lied about our son's entire existence. He had let me believe our child was stillborn, a silent, painless tragedy, when in reality Caleb had lived. He had breathed, and he had died alone without his mother while his father refused to even go see him. Why? The answer was right there in the video, in the cold, hard expression on Jenna Reed's face, in the frantic, trapped energy of my husband, a living, breathing baby, a premature baby who would require months of intensive care and a lifetime of devotion that was not part of their plan. It was the ultimate complication. A stillbirth was a tragedy you could mourn and move on from. A critically ill child was an anchor, a lifelong responsibility that would have chained Michael to me forever. So he made a choice. He chose his affair over his son. He rewrote the narrative. He turned our son's fight for life into a story of instantaneous death. He curated my grief, managed my reality, to fit his sordid escape plan. The rage that had been simmering inside me erupted into a volcanic inferno. It was a physical force, so powerful I thought it would tear me apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy something. I wanted to walk into the bedroom and wake him up, not with words, but with my bare hands. But then a different instinct took over, a cold, chilling calm. The same calm I'd felt when I'd decided to look at his laptop. This wasn't a private matter anymore. This wasn't a marital dispute to be settled with screaming matches and thrown pottery. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had committed an act of unimaginable cruelty against his own child. He had defrauded a hospital. He had lied to doctors. And he had enlisted his mistress as a co-conspirator. The leaked footage wasn't just my personal vindication. It was evidence. I forwarded the email with the video link to Isabella Rossi, the investigative journalist. My note was simple. This is security footage from St. Jude's Medical Center on the night of May 12th. The man in the video is Michael Davenport, a prominent Austin architect. He told his wife their son was stillborn. As you can see, that was a lie. Look into the NICU records. Look into Jenna Reed of Reed PR in Chicago. Look into the memorial garden he is currently fundraising for. He didn't just have an affair. He let his son die alone to save it. And then I forwarded it to the police. The story broke 2 days later. It wasn't just a local story. It went national. Isabella Rossi's article was a masterpiece of controlled fury, laying out the facts in stark, brutal detail. "The architect of a monstrous lie," the headline screamed. The article included stills from the security footage, Michael's face contorted in anger or Jenna's cold and watchful. It detailed the timeline, the emails, the hospital bill, the confirmation from anonymous sources at St. Jude's that baby boy Davenport had indeed spent 72 hours in the NICU before succumbing to complications of his premature birth. They had tried repeatedly to get the father to come and see the child, to authorize certain procedures, but he had been unreachable or unwilling to engage. The public response was instantaneous and savage. The story was a perfect storm of infidelity, betrayal, and the ultimate parental sin. Michael became a villain of almost cartoonish proportions overnight. His face was everywhere, on cable news, on tabloid websites, on social media feeds. The name Michael Davenport became synonymous with narcissistic cruelty. His firm fired him, issuing a public statement denouncing his deplorable and unethical personal conduct. The fundraising page for the memorial garden was taken down, but not before screenshots circulated online, a testament to his staggering hypocrisy. People found his social media, his firm's page, my own long-dormant accounts. The comments were a torrent of hatred. Monster. Psychopath. I hope he rots in hell. Jenna Reed was not spared. Her PR firm's website was flooded with one-star reviews. Her professional headshot was juxtaposed with the grainy security footage, still of her watching Michael's fake breakdown. She was branded the home-wrecking ghoul. Her career was incinerated in a matter of hours. I watched it all unfold from the guest room of Mark and Sarah's house. I had packed a single bag the morning after I saw the video and left before Michael woke up. I left my wedding ring on the pillow next to his head. I didn't leave a note. The entire world was about to leave him a note. My own role in the story was that of the tragic victim. The media painted me as the poor, grieving mother doubly betrayed by her monstrous husband. My photo, a smiling, pregnant shot from my Instagram, was splashed everywhere. I received an outpouring of sympathy from strangers around the world. It was surreal and strangely numbing. Their pity felt as distant and impersonal as their rage towards Michael. The only thing that felt real was the new agonizing truth about my son. Caleb. He had lived. He had a birth date and a death date. He had been a person in the world, however briefly. And this new knowledge brought with it a new kind of grief. It was sharper, more defined. I wasn't just mourning the loss of a dream anymore. I was mourning a real boy, a boy whose father had discarded him like a piece of trash. A few days after the story broke, Michael was arrested. The charge wasn't murder or anything as dramatic as the online mob wanted. It was fraud. He had knowingly provided false information to the hospital, leading them to misclassify the death and issue an incorrect death certificate. There were also questions about medical decisions that were delayed or not made because of his refusal to engage. It was a messy, complex legal situation, but for now, the fraud charge was enough to hold him. I saw his mugshot online. The handsome, charming architect was gone. In his place was a hollow-eyed, unshaven man with a haunted, terrified expression. He looked broken, but I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. The unveiling was complete. The perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect grief, it had all been a lie. And now the truth in all its ugly, brutal glory was out for the world to see. I had gotten the truth. I had gotten my revenge. But as I sat in that quiet guest room, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I had to face the terrifying question of what came next. The world loves a good villain, and Michael Davenport was tailor-made for the role. The media frenzy was relentless, a piranha-like swarm that stripped every detail of our lives down to the bone. Our wedding photos holiday, snaps my baby shower pictures. They were all repurposed as exhibits in the public trial of my husband. Each smiling image was now imbued with a sinister irony. Look at the happy couple just months before he let their baby die. I remained sequestered at Mark and Sarah's, a voluntary prisoner in their suburban guest room. They were magnificent, acting as gatekeepers against the world. They fielded calls from reporters, deflected nosy neighbors, and kept me supplied with tea and tissues. Sarah would sit with me for hours, not pressing me to talk, just offering a solid, comforting presence against the tsunami of chaos. My grief for Caleb had transformed. The murky, undefined sorrow of losing a stillborn child was replaced by the sharp, specific agony of mourning a son I never knew. I requested the full medical records from St. Jude's. They arrived in a thick manila envelope, and I read them with a forensic intensity. I learned his weight, 3 pounds, 2 ounces. His length, 15 inches. I read the nurse's notes, their neat professional script detailing his every struggle. Infant exhibiting respiratory distress. apnea episodes increasing in frequency, attempts to contact father unsuccessful. These clinical details were both torture and a strange kind of solace. They made him real. He wasn't just a phantom kick in my belly. He was a tiny person who had fought. The knowledge was a knife in my heart, but it was a real knife, not the phantom pain I'd been living with. I was no longer grieving a possibility. I was grieving a person. And with that came a new, focused anger. Not just at Michael, but at myself. How had I not known? How could a mother not feel on some primal cellular level that her child was alive? The guilt was a heavy cloak suffocating me. Michael denied bail due to being a flight risk, and the sheer public outrage languished in county jail. His high-powered family in Connecticut hired a top-tier legal team led by a shark of a defense attorney named Marcus Thorne, who immediately went on the offensive. Thorne's strategy was clear paint Michael not as a monster, but as a man who had suffered a profound psychological break. Mr. Davenport was under unimaginable stress. Thorne declared on the courthouse steps, his voice oozing sincerity. The impending birth, the pressures of his career, and a marriage that was already quietly fracturing led to a dissociative episode. He created a false narrative, not out of malice, but because his mind simply could not cope with the reality of his son's critical condition. This is not a case of fraud. It's a case of profound mental trauma. It was a brilliant, insidious defense. It attempted to reclaim the narrative of grief that Michael himself had so expertly woven. I watched the press conference on TV, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. A psychological break. He hadn't had a break. He'd had a plan. The emails to Jenna were proof of that. Speaking of Jenna, she had vanished. Her social media was deleted, her firm's website was offline, and her office was shuttered. The press couldn't find her. But the police did. She was located in a luxury spa resort in Arizona, having fled Chicago the day the story broke. They brought her back to Austin for questioning. She was not charged with a crime, she had broken no laws, but she was a material witness, and facing the ruin of her career and the full force of public condemnation, she decided to save herself. She made a deal with the prosecutors for immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her deposition was leaked to the press, of course. Every sordid detail. She recounted how she and Michael had met, the thrill of their affair, their shared fantasy of a future together. And then she came to the part about the baby. According to Jenna, the pregnancy had been a crisis point. Michael had assured her he would leave me, but the baby complicated everything. Her version of events painted Michael as weak and indecisive a man, panicking as his carefully compartmentalized life began to converge. He told me the baby would trap him, her deposition read. He said that if the baby was born healthy, he'd never be able to leave. The guilt would be too much, the societal pressure too great. We were in the hotel in Chicago when Amelia went into labor. He was a mess. He kept saying, "This is a disaster. This ruins everything." The most chilling part of her testimony concerned the hours at the hospital. She admitted to going there to confront him, to demand he make a choice. And she described the moment he learned Caleb was alive, but critically ill. He came out of the delivery area, and his face was white, she stated. He said, "It's alive, but it's sick. They don't think it's going to make it." And then he looked at me, and I saw a look in his eye. It was cold, calculating. He said, this could be a way out, a clean break. He decided right then and there. He told me the plan he would tell Amelia the baby was stillborn. He said it would be kinder that way. A quick, tragic end, instead of weeks or months of false hope. He said it would let them grieve together, and then, when the time was right, they could go their separate ways. He said it was the only way to manage the situation without destroying everyone. Kinder. He had called this monstrous selfish deception an act of kindness. He had appointed himself the arbiter of my grief, the editor of my reality, to facilitate his escape into a new life. Jenna's testimony destroyed Marcus Thorne's psychological break defense. This wasn't a man unmoored from reality. This was a man executing a premeditated, cold-blooded plan. The fallout from Jenna's deposition was a second explosion ripping through what little was left of our social circle. People were forced to take sides. My side was easy: the wronged wife, the grieving mother. His was impossible. His friends, his colleagues, even some of his family publicly disavowed him. He was utterly alone. One evening, Mark came into the guest room, a grim look on his face. "You got a letter," he said, holding it out as if it were contaminated. "From him. It was sent here from his lawyer." I took it from him, my hand steady. I hadn't heard a single word from Michael since I'd left. No calls, no texts, no emails. Just the public pronouncements of his lawyer. I slit the envelope open. The letter was written on a piece of yellow legal paper, his familiar architectural script looking alien and obscene. "Amelia, I know you will never forgive me. I don't expect you to. I don't forgive myself." Listening to Thorne talk in court, listening to what Jenna said, it's like hearing about a stranger, a monster. I don't know who that man was. The pressure, the lies, it all just avalanched. I was suffocating, and I made a choice. A terrible, unforgivable choice. I see his face now, Amy. The nurses at St. Jude's, they showed me a picture. After it was over. I wouldn't look at the time. I refused. But they put a photograph in my discharge file. I found it when I was looking for paperwork for Thorne. I've been looking at it every night here in my cell. He looked like you. He had your nose. I destroyed everything. I destroyed you. I destroyed our son. I destroyed myself. I know sorry is a pathetic, meaningless word. It's an insult. But it's the only one I have. Don't let this destroy you. Please. You are a good person. You deserved a good life, a good husband. You deserved to be Caleb's mother. And I stole that from you. Michael. I read the letter twice. There was no rage left in me. No fire. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness. His apology, his self-pity, his supposed realization, it was all too little too late. It was the pathetic whimper of a man who had been caught. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for the consequences. He looked like you. He had your nose. The words were meant to be a bridge, a shared detail of our son. But all it did was highlight the chasm between us. He had a photograph, a picture of our son's face. And he had kept that from me, too. Another secret, another layer of his betrayal. I folded the letter neatly. I did not rip it up. I did not burn it. I placed it in the manila envelope with Caleb's medical records. It was just one more piece of evidence in the case file of my shattered life. The unraveling was almost complete. The lies had all been exposed. The villain had been caged, and the truth was a harsh, unforgiving glare. All that was left was the trial and the daunting task of figuring out how to live in the scorched earth he had left behind. The trial of Michael Davenport was a spectacle. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like the final act of a grim, nationally televised play. I was there for every moment, a silent, black-clad figure in the front row. I refused to let the media's portrayal of me as a fragile, broken victim define me. I needed to bear witness. I owed it to Caleb. Michael, clad in an ill-fitting suit, looked like a ghost. The charm and confidence that had once been his armor were gone, replaced by a hollowed-out resignation. He rarely looked at me. When our eyes did meet across the courtroom, his were filled with a desperate, pleading shame. I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. The prosecution, armed with the security footage, the emails and Jenna Reed's damning testimony, laid out their case with brutal efficiency. They painted a picture of a cold, narcissistic man who viewed his own child as a complication to be managed. They called nurses from St. Jude's to the stand who testified through tears about baby boy Davenport's fight for life and their frustrating, futile attempts to get his father involved. He told me on the phone, "There's no point in me coming down there. It's a foregone conclusion." One veteran NICU nurse testified, her voice thick with contempt. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen parents in denial, in shock, in every state of grief imaginable. I have never, ever seen a parent so indifferent." The defense, hamstrung by Jenna's testimony, did their best to salvage the psychological break narrative, but it rang hollow. Marcus Thorne put a psychiatrist on the stand who spoke of narcissistic personality disorder and acute stress reactions. But under cross-examination, even he had to admit that Michael's actions, the meticulous lies, the cover-up, the manipulation of me demonstrated a high degree of planning and cognitive function, not a break from reality. The moment that will forever be seared into my memory was when the prosecution introduced the photograph of Caleb into evidence, the one Michael had mentioned in his letter. They had retrieved it from his files. An evidence technician projected it onto the large screens in the courtroom. And there he was, my son. He was so tiny, nestled in a tangle of wires and tubes. His skin was translucent, his eyes were closed, and his tiny chest was still. But he was beautiful. He was perfect. He had my nose, and a shock of dark hair, just like Michael's. A sound escaped my lips, a raw, guttural sob that I couldn't contain. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell utterly silent. In that moment, he was not baby boy Davenport, the tragic figure in a news story. He was Caleb, my Caleb, and the world was finally seeing him. I saw Michael crumple at the defendant's table, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. For the first time, his grief looked real, but it was a selfish grief. Grief for himself, for the life he'd lost, the man he'd failed to be. It had nothing to do with the tiny boy on the screen. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty. Guilty of felony fraud. Guilty of reckless endangerment. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, delivered the sentence a week later. She spoke directly to Michael, her voice dripping with scorn. "You did not just lie, Mr. Davenport," she said, her eyes boring into him. "You constructed an alternate reality of unimaginable cruelty. You weaponized your wife's grief and love for you to cover your own pathetic infidelities. You treated the life and death of your own son as an inconvenience to be managed. Your crime is not just against the state or the hospital. It is a crime against humanity, against the very definition of fatherhood. It is one of the most profound acts of narcissistic cruelty I have ever witnessed from this bench." She sentenced him to the maximum possible term, 10 years in state prison. A gasp went through the courtroom. 10 years. It was a harsh sentence for fraud, but it was clear the judge was sentencing the moral crime, not just the legal one. I walked out of the courthouse into a sea of cameras and reporters. I didn't stop. I just kept walking, Mark and Sarah flanking me like bodyguards. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. The noise that had been roaring in my head for months had finally subsided. It was over. The weeks and months that followed were a slow, painful process of rebuilding. I sold the house, the one with the beige walls and the nursery that had become a mausoleum. I couldn't bear to be in it another second. I took my half of the assets and moved into a small, bright apartment in a different part of Austin, a part of the city that held no memories of him. I legally changed my last name back to my maiden name, Amelia Shelton. It was a small act, but a significant one. I was no longer Amelia Davenport. That woman, the one who believed in the Pottery Barn fantasy, was gone. She had died with Caleb. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and grief. We talked about Caleb. We talked about Michael. We talked about the complex, tangled knot of my own guilt and rage. She helped me understand that I couldn't have known that I was the victim of a master manipulator, and that my body and mind, under the trauma of childbirth and what I believed was catastrophic loss, had been in survival mode. I never spoke to Michael again. His lawyers reached out regarding the divorce proceedings, which were swift and uncontested. He signed everything, gave me everything I asked for. It was his final futile act of penance. I heard through the grapevine that Jenna Reed had moved to another state, changed her name, and was attempting to start over forever, branded by her association with the case. I found I didn't have the energy to hate her. She was just another piece of wreckage in the blast zone of Michael's lies. My life now is quiet. It is small. I still work as a graphic designer, but I find my greatest solace in volunteering at a local animal shelter. The uncomplicated, unconditional affection of the abandoned dogs and cats is a balm to my soul. I have a framed copy of Caleb's photograph on my nightstand. It's the only picture I have of him, the one from the courtroom. I look at it every day. I tell him good morning and I tell him good night. I tell him about my day. I tell him that I love him. I am in my own quiet way, finally getting to be his mother. The grief for him will never go away. It has become a part of me, a shadow that walks beside me. But it is no longer an all-consuming darkness. Sometimes it is even a source of strength. It reminds me of what is real, of what is important. It reminds me of the devastating cost of lies. I don't know if I will ever trust anyone fully again. I don't know if I will ever remarry or have more children. The future is not a bright, shining path anymore. It is a quiet, winding road, and I am taking it one step at a time. I have survived the unimaginable. I have walked through the fire of the ugliest of truths and come out on the other side. I am scarred. I am changed. But I am still here. And in the quiet of my new life, for the first time, in a very long time, that feels like enough. The story of Amelia and Michael is a harrowing reminder that sometimes the most devastating monsters are the ones sleeping right beside us, hidden behind a mask of love and concern. It's a story about the corrosive power of lies and the unimaginable depths of betrayal. But it's also a story of survival of a woman who walked through an inferno of public humiliation and private agony to reclaim her own truth and find a way to honor the son who was stolen from her twice. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. More importantly, leave a comment below. What part of Amelia's story resonated with you the most? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story that peels back the layers of the human experience and reveals the truth, no matter how shocking it might be. Thank you for listening.